I'm visiting my mother tomorrow.
Welcome to You Don't Know Zach About. Today's video is going to be a little bit looser. Everything here is going to be off the top of the dome. It's going to be a rant style video where I kind of just talk about Ari Aster and Beau is Afraid. To get into Ari Aster, before we get into Beau is Afraid, Ari Aster is the acclaimed film director of Hereditary and Midsommar, two of the best horror movies made in the last 10 years. Hereditary being, in my opinion, a masterpiece of horror and a masterpiece of storytelling that features some wonderful acting from the very talented and lovely Toni Collette, and the Alex Wolff, who is not an actor I typically like. Alex Wolff is known for his role in Death Note as traditionally Light Yagami. I forget, they Americanized his name in that movie. It's really, really bad. He does not do a good job in that movie, but he does a great job in Hereditary. If you have not seen Hereditary yet, that is a movie worth checking out, especially if you like sort of traditional possession films. That is definitely one to go check out. There are some twists in that movie that I don't want to give away because, again, I do think it is a 10 out of 10 film, and it is worth watching in your lifetime if you are a fan of horror. Midsommar is also a fantastic film, an 8 out of 10 for me personally. It is a cult movie, not as similar to Hereditary. Definitely in Midsommar, there's not nearly as many supernatural elements, if any supernatural elements going on. There is a fantastic meditation on toxic relationships, male abuse of females, and also finding your community, which sounds hilarious considering it's a cult movie, but a lot of that movie is about Florence Pugh's Dani just trying to find a community that understands her. It just so happens to be the wrong one. But to kind of get into Ari Aster is a Jewish-American film director. The reason that I bring that up is because both he and Nathan Lane describe Beau is Afraid as Lord of the Rings for Jewish people. This is a movie about a man, Beau Wasserman, trying to make it in time for his mother's funeral. That is the basic premise of the film. The sort of subtext of this is a Murphy's Law style film in the vein of like an After Hours by Martin Scorsese or A Good Time by the Safdie brothers. Even Uncut Gems is something that you could compare Beau is Afraid to. Just to kind of get it out of the way, because that's kind of the structure of the channel. Do I recommend Beau is Afraid? I absolutely do. I think Ari Aster has once again knocked it out of the park. I think that this is a masterpiece of filmmaking. However, if you are wanting another horror film out of this man, which I could completely understand, if you're looking for something spooky, something scary, this is not the movie for you. There are moments in this movie which are going to make you very anxious. There are moments in this movie that are going to make you want to smack your forehead, face palm. But nothing in this movie is particularly scary. I would go ahead and let you know, because this is going to be a longer video, that I believe Beau is Afraid is a 10 out of 10. Now, just to get briefly into the acting before we kind of start to roll into the plot, we have a pretty star-studded cast here. Joaquin Phoenix, obviously, is our main character. I will watch anything that this man is in because he is just that fantastic. He really embodies this sort of man-child character. It feels like he's quaking in his boots every second of the film, and he is on the verge of tears. He is infantilized to the nth degree by his mother, Mona Wasserman, who does pass away at the beginning of the film. Later on, is portrayed by Patti LuPone in flashback sequences and in a surprise twist that we get later on in the movie. Amy Ryan from The Office, that's her most famous role, appears as Nathan Lane's wife, Grace. Nathan Lane appears in the movie as Roger, a surgeon who tends to Beau after Grace hits him with a van. Their teenage daughter is played by Kylie Rogers. We also get an appearance from Richard Kind and Bill Hader. Both make cameos, both over the phone in the very beginning of the movie, and then towards the end they both make physical appearances, though Bill Hader's character has his back turned to the camera. You can tell that it is his voice. Very, very funny cameo. That's pretty much it for the acting. Everybody in this movie really sells it. The actors who play the young versions of Beau and his love interest Elaine do a fantastic job. Everybody delivers a really solid performance. This is the type of movie that requires everybody be on board 100%, from the visual effects team to the cinematographer, the directing, the acting, the effects. Everybody needs to be in on this 1,000%. The other thing I can think of that is similar in that regard is Everything Everywhere All at Once. Both of these are movies that require everyone to have a passion for what it is that they are making, and as I came out of Beau is Afraid, I felt that passion 100%. So to get into the plot of Beau is Afraid, again, pretty simple premise, Beau is a very nervous, neurotic, possibly schizophrenic man who is informed that his mother has passed away. And I think one of the most important scenes in the entire movie is our opening scene. Beau is at therapy. His therapist seems to really zero in on his mother. I think part of this really supports the theme, which is that Beau isn't a man who wants to live under his mother's thumb. It is sort of instinct. It is reflex. He's simply lived this way so long that when other people force this concept onto him, it is hard for him to shy away. Throughout the movie, Beau is a man perpetually paralyzed by inaction. There's really no other way, in my opinion, to describe this character. He's incapable of making a decision for himself, and anytime anybody gives him any sort of pushback on anything he wants to do, he immediately backs down and does whatever he's told. That is the best characterization of this person. This is a movie at its core about mother issues, although there is a lot of other things going on. The movie begins in a very surreal environment. As Beau leaves his therapist and arrives home, we are treated to a pretty insane city where there's a lot of, murder. There's naked people running around. There's police officers firing on random people in the street, drug addicts, prostitutes, etc., etc. I think for a lot of people who went into this film, at least from the reviews that I'm seeing, there are certain portions of this movie that for them are difficult to believe. Now, I spent my young adult years living in Los Angeles, in Hollywood. I worked graveyard shifts at a pizza place off of Hollywood Boulevard. And I have to tell you, when I was watching this movie and nothing about the way that people on the street behaved was like out of character to me, nothing seemed that weird. I have to tell you, if you think that this behavior from these people, these like drug addicts and these crazy homeless people that are like harassing Beau, that are attacking each other on the street, if you think that that is unrealistic, it's because you have never lived in a major city before. This is one of the most realistic depictions of the absolute chaos that is a downtown Los Angeles, a Skid Row, even parts of Hollywood late at night. This is a very accurate and apt depiction of internal anxieties about going out into a city environment, and I think that this movie really nails it. It's pretty clear that Ari Aster has some experience with living in major cities and the just sheer horror that comes out of it. Beau promptly loses his keys as he's trying to make his flight to go see his mother. And then in our first interaction with Mona Wasserman, Beau calls her to inform her that he has lost his keys and he has lost his luggage, and he does not feel comfortable leaving his home unlocked while he is on such a long journey. His mother immediately disbelieves him, but it's not immediately apparent. If you have ever had a passive-aggressive romantic partner or a passive-aggressive parent, somebody who does not believe anything that you say, the dialogue here is going to nail you in your heart. I have dated a couple of people who have this sort of constant paranoia of, oh, no, there's no way you're telling me the truth. That has to be an excuse. Yada, yada, yada. And it haunts Beau. It's something that clearly cripples Beau and puts him into a strange, uncomfortable position where he's trying to please his mother, but again, he's not trying to leave his home in a state of decay. At this point, Beau has to take his medication, an experimental medication prescribed to him by his therapist. In a point about the medication, his doctor tells him he's to take 1 pill per day with water. The reason I bring this up, and the reason I believe that it supports the idea that Beau is schizophrenic, is that Ari Aster is a meticulous filmmaker. He's very, very meticulous. He leaves things in the backgrounds of his movies, such as in Hereditary, which really support the overall themes of the films and also contributes to the plot in a meaningful way. This is a detailed man. So when Beau looks at the description on the side of his pill bottle, it says take 2 pills daily with water. This is my first indication that this is not a man who sees reality the way that the rest of the world does. I think that that could contribute to a lot of the city scenes and also just the general way that people treat Beau. It can be explained away by Beau's paranoid schizophrenia. And also the fact that Ari Aster seems intent on taking every anxiety you have ever had in your life, every paranoid thought that may have ever crossed your mind socially, personally, professionally, and puts it onto screen for you to watch unfold. Now, Beau is terrified of the outside world and wants to get this over with as quickly as possible. The water in his building has been shut off, so he has to go across the street to a convenience store to get his water. His card has been turned off by his mother. It's at this point that we learn that Beau is entirely financially dependent upon his mother. It does not seem like he works a job, and it's never implied that he has one. He leaves a yellow book in the apartment entrance to his building. It is at this point that he gets stuck at the grocery store trying to pay for the water and watches as all of the insanity from outside, the homeless people, the killers, the drug addicts, the prostitutes, run inside of his building and then promptly file inside his open apartment. He spends the night outside on some scaffolding, watching his apartment get decimated from the inside. Again, this is a movie about taking all of your deepest fears, your deepest anxieties. What if a bunch of homeless people broke into and took control of my home? It is at this point that Beau in the morning wakes up and finds that somebody has died inside of his apartment from a brown recluse bite, and this is what has caused everyone else to evacuate. Beau tries calling his mother to see what is going on with his credit card and to see if it's possible for him to get a flight out to see her. Now that his apartment has been trashed and there's a dead man inside, there's no real reason for Beau to stay in this place. The phone call then proceeds to go to a USPS man who is played by Bill Hader. The voice cameo is pretty distinct. It was one of those things where as I was listening to it, I kept going, is that Bill Hader? And at the end of the movie, when they do a cameo of him with a newscast, it's confirmed that it is indeed Bill Hader. And he informs Beau that he has found a woman at Beau's mother's house who is missing her head. The chandelier at Beau's mother's house has fallen and crushed his mother's head, or so we're told. And Beau is now incredibly distraught. One of the best scenes in this movie is this phone call. I think it's a very earnest and honest depiction of what it's like to be told that somebody you love has passed from a remote location. It's happened to me where somebody that I know and love has died, and you aren't told until after the fact or from a very far away place. And the way Beau reacts is pretty realistic, in my opinion. He decides he's going to go take a bath, which he's already drawn and is now overflowing into his apartment, before he kind of makes his next decision. It's at this point, as Beau is in the bath, that he starts to get water dripped on him from above, and he looks up to see a man, Mission Impossible style, pressed against the sort of ceiling enclave above the bathtub. It's at this point the man falls, incapable of holding himself up any longer, probably having been there all night if he is a real person, and he and Beau proceed to do a sort of dance in this bathtub before Beau runs out of the apartment complex itself, and is then confronted by a police officer. Obviously, if you were to run up to a police officer naked and screaming of, there's a man hiding in my apartment, blah, 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 most police officers are probably going to freak out. This one draws his gun and threatens to shoot Beau. It seems pretty obvious that this man is not going to back down. He won't even arrest Beau. It's a pretty fascinating sequence. It could be argued that the reason this is happening is because there is a killer going around, or a serial stabber who is naked. It's shown early in the film that is a recurring thing. And after Beau is hit by Grace and Roger, played by, again, Amy Ryan and Nathan Lane, he's then also stabbed while he's on the ground by the serial stabber. But I think this interaction with the police officer is yet again another indication of Beau's mental illness, that Beau is not a normal man, that things that Beau sees are not how things actually happen. It's at this point, after Beau is knocked out by the van and stabbed, that he wakes up in the home of Roger and Grace. Roger is a world-class surgeon, married to Amy Ryan's Grace. They have two children. One is a deceased former U.S. Marine, and one is their teenage daughter, Tony. They also, in their home, have one of their son's former platoon members. His name is Jeeves, and Jeeves suffers from a clear case of PTSD. His character is interesting because it feeds into the narrative of over-medication and mental illness, and the way that we tend to brush over people with mental illness. We tend to just say, hey, take these pills, and if you are a problem, we'll either ignore it or pretend like everything is fine because your medication is supposed to be sort of doing the job for you. Or at least that's what I took away from a lot of this film, especially when later on in the movie we find out that Beau's mother was an ad exec and did quite a few advertisements for medication. It seems very obvious that this is a case of Munchausen syndrome, not only between Beau and his mother, but also between Roger and Grace and Beau, Roger and Grace and their daughter, and even Roger and Grace and Jeeves, the man that they have brought into their home. Beau now learns that his mother is dead through a very uncomfortable phone call with Richard Kine's character, a family doctor, who basically tells Beau that he is a huge disappointment for not having arrived at the funeral, and that it was his mother's wish that the funeral be put off until Beau arrives. This also, again, is speculation, as we learned later in the movie. Just to spoil it, Beau's mother is not dead. I alluded to this earlier in the rant. Beau's mom has not died. We'll get to it later, but I do believe, again, that this moment is telling of Beau's mental state. No one really talks to anybody like this. I have been insulted directly to my face before, and also been kind of passive-aggressively insulted, and even the way that characters talk to Beau in this movie is over the line. There are people who talk to Beau, pretty much everybody talks to Beau as if he's almost a worm, like he's not really a human being. And it's pretty interesting to see. Again, this is a movie about taking your deepest anxieties and putting them on screen for other people to see. Beau spends some time with Roger and Grace trying to deal with their teenage daughter, Tony, whose room he has usurped while he is recovering. Tony is none too pleased about this and tortures Beau in any way she can, including convincing him that she is going to be the one taking him to the airport, where she gives him what looks like just weed. Again, it could be possible that Beau's medication is interacting with the weed in a way that it makes him extra paranoid and extra weirded out, because he seems to go kind of into a distant place while the next 30 or so minutes of the movie are going on. One of the most painfully uncomfortable and anxiety-inducing parts of this is that Beau is desperate to get back to his mother after learning of her passing. He wants to make it home in time for her funeral. But Nathan Lane and Amy Ryan's characters just seem ignorant of the way that this would make a person feel. They seem to kind of wave off Beau's concerns. One thing after another pops up that forces them to put off getting him back home, to the point where eventually Beau kind of loses it. But again, Beau is not a person who does things. He only gets more and more anxious and more frustrated. And in the sort of climactic moment of the second act that we spend in Amy Ryan and Nathan Lane's home, Beau is informed by Amy Ryan's Grace to watch a specific channel on the TV. The bit here is kind of obvious that he's being watched on the cameras. The thing that is not obvious is that these cameras show Beau's future as well. He hits the fast forward on the remote and is shown not only the events that are about to happen to him in the home of Roger and Grace, but also events that happen to him later on in the movie inside the home of his mother. So again, it's pretty obvious that Beau has some issues here. He's also being slipped notes throughout the movie. In the very beginning of the movie, as Beau is just trying to sleep in a dead silent apartment, one of his neighbors in the apartment complex keeps coming and putting notes under his door asking him to turn down his music, claiming that he's making the music louder with each passing moment. This is one of the most interesting moments in the movie, because the question is Beau crazy and he's playing music and doesn't hear it? Is Beau crazy and these notes aren't real and he's getting, he's imagining these fake notes because he wants to believe the world is instigating him, that the world is victimizing him? It's hard to say. It's hard to say if these are all things that Beau is just making up in his head, or if he really lives in such an insane world. I think that the movie is really trying to constantly confuse you with that. At this point, after Beau sees the film of his life, is the best way to put it, the teenage daughter, Tony, arrives at the house with 2 buckets of paint. She demands that Beau come into her deceased brother's room with her, where she has a mental breakdown and paints Beau's name in red on the wall, and then demands that Beau drink a bucket of paint with her in a mutual suicide pact. Beau refuses. It's one of the few times Beau refuses to do something throughout the movie, and Tony drinks the bucket of paint, promptly dies. Amy Ryan's Grace finds her on the floor and proceeds to freak out, blaming Beau for this incident. Beau runs away because that's really all Beau knows how to do. Beau doesn't really know how to make decisions or explain himself. He decides, well, I don't really have much else I can do in this moment, so he runs into the woods that surround Roger and Grace's home. Grace, very upset, asks Jeeves to tear Beau limb from limb. Jeeves obviously is PTSD-ridden Marine vet and has quite a few weapons up his arsenal, and they have also outfitted Joaquin Phoenix's Beau with a tracker around his foot. Again, sort of to go into the putting your anxieties and deepest fears on screen. What would it be like if you were basically trapped by two people and incapable of escaping? Beau runs into the woods. He smacks his head on a tree branch and is knocked out, where he then wakes up to find a traveling theater troupe. He's brought into this troupe by a pregnant woman who's very motherly and kind, and is meant to be in a movie about mother figures, to go back to sort of a classic writing concept of two fathers. In writing, there's this concept of two fathers. There's a good father and a bad father, and a lot of movies follow this. I mean, the most obvious one is Star Wars, with Darth Vader being the bad father, Obi-Wan Kenobi and Yoda being the good fathers. Those are the most obvious examples. They're meant to be sort of the dichotomy of what happens when a person is raised well and what happens when a person is raised poorly. And in this scene, we are shown what may happen if Beau is given some level of real love, real genuine affection and love by somebody who is concerned for his well-being. And for a moment in the movie, Beau actually seems like he is relaxed and at peace. The theater troupe in this section reminds me, oddly enough, a lot of the people living out in the wilderness in The Lobster, which is another fantastic film that kind of reminds me of this movie in tone and atmosphere. Beau is then treated to a play. At first, we believe that this is the play of his life. In one of the most beautiful sequences in the movie, Beau goes through an animated journey of sort of his life, but also an allegory for his own father's life. It's at this point that I would like to talk about Beau's father. So in flashback sequences, we have been told that Beau's father died of a heart murmur, and later on in the movie, we get the information that Beau's father died mid-coitus with his mother during ejaculation. The heart murmur kills him. It's the one and only time he has sex, and it's what results in Beau. It is this sort of deep-rooted sin that colors Beau's entire life. It's obvious that Beau's mother, Mona, blames him for this, that he carries the weight of his father's death, his father's sin, and she insists to Beau that he has the same condition and he himself can also never have sex. It really colors a lot of the interactions they have, particularly when Beau is a young man and they are on a cruise and he meets the young Elaine. His mother encourages him to pursue this, which I thought was odd the first time I watched it. But as I thought about it and I contemplated over it, it makes a lot of sense. His mother is a manipulative woman. His mother is there to get him to do things so that she can get mad at him for them. So if he were to start dating this girl, seeing this girl, it would give her an excuse to claim that he doesn't care about her, that he doesn't care about himself, because he's willing to put his own life at danger solely for the chance of love or getting laid. Beau's father, as we later learn, did not die. Did not have a heart murmur. We learn this at the scene in the play. So to kind of wrap these two things into each other, Beau plays a version of himself who, in ancient times, comes across a village, falls in love, has 3 sons. He's separated from his love and his 3 children, only to later then find them at a play where they are actors in the play, and he gets to reunite with his children. That's sort of the very quick summary of a very long portion of this movie, which is very, very beautiful and very, very well done and animated. It's a very long animated section of the movie. It's at this point that a mysterious man approaches Beau and informs Beau that he knew Beau's father, and he worked with him and helped clean him, implying that his father was feeble to some degree at some point in his life. Beau watches this man kind of leave, back away, and then has the realization that this man is probably lying to him, like most everybody else has lied to Beau throughout his life, and that this probably is his father. Before his father is blown up by a hand grenade from the now arriving Jeeves, Beau says, "Oh, are you my daddy?" We get no answer to this question, though Beau is pretty convinced that this is his father. Again, this is a movie that deals in not deception, but in hallucination. If Beau really is a schizophrenic, there's no way he can trust his eyes and ears. There's no way he can trust any of these elements of his life, because the perception of a schizophrenic is very different to the perception of a regular person or a non-neurodivergent person, to put it that way. Obviously, at this point, Jeeves has arrived and begins to start assassinating the people of the traveling theater troupe. He does end up dying in this section. I think it's important to note Jeeves ends up blowing himself away with his own Uzi. He ends up shooting himself to death by falling on his Uzi. It's at this point that Beau manages to hitch a ride. He gets out onto the main road and he hitches a ride with a man that we get to know nothing about, which, it's one of the few sections of the movie where Beau just hangs out with a person and then arrives at his mother's house. He arrives at his mother's house too late for the funeral. Everybody has already left and everybody is kind of gathering everything together. A eulogy is being played while Beau travels around the house, and this supports this view that Beau is some sort of bad child. It is definitely implied throughout the movie that not only does his mother Mona view him this way, but everyone else who knows Beau and his mother also views him this way, that Beau did not give to his mother the love that she gave to him. And in one of the most revelatory moments of the movie, and in a moment that almost seems obvious as it's coming, Beau goes to the timeline of his mother's life. When it comes to her death, there is a portrait of her, which is made of all of the smaller portraits of everyone who worked for her. And on this wall is Nathan Lane's character and also the therapist from the beginning of the movie. There's also a few other characters throughout the movie that appear on the poster. Again, it's hard to say whether or not this is part of Mona's deception or if this is Beau just being crazy. Again, this is a movie definitely about perception. This is definitely a movie about the way that we perceive others and the way that they perceive us and the traps that can put us into. And it can be hard to say whether or not Beau is really seeing this for real, if these people really did contribute to some sort of lifelong deception of Beau. It's at this point that Beau's childhood sweetheart Elaine arrives at the house just looking to pay her respects to the now passed away Mona. They rekindle their long-lost flame. This is an interesting moment to me because I was curious as to why Elaine was so eager to sleep with a man who is a mess. Beau at this point is covered head to toe in dirt and blood. He's also not a good-looking man, just to put it out there. Elaine is a normal woman of her age, mid-40s, mid-50s is what I would put her and Beau at in this movie. But Beau is not. Beau is not put together. He's thinning. He's out of shape. Again, he's covered head to toe in dirt and blood, but Elaine is not really perturbed by what she sees. She takes him upstairs to Mona's bedroom, which again I think is a heavily symbolic moment in the movie. I think there's a reason that Beau and Elaine have intercourse in his mother's bed. It's supposed to really feed into the strange Oedipal complex in the Munchausen syndrome that is going on throughout this movie. It's at this point that Beau and Elaine have sex. It's probably because Beau is willing to put anything up for grabs at this point. His mother is dead. His apartment is gone. He has no one else in the world as far as he knows. He orgasms, and it's at this point that Beau figures out the lie for sure. This is when it's become concrete because he doesn't die. It's obvious that his mother lied to him about the heart murmur, that he does not have a heart murmur, and this confirms the lie that his father died. His father did not die. His father also did not have a heart murmur. He most likely simply left Mona, and then Mona had to come up with some sort of excuse as to why Beau's father was not there, and figured the best way to deal with it was to simply say that he was dead. It's at this point that Elaine dies. Now, this is the strangest part about this movie because it seems to tell you that Elaine has a heart murmur, that there's something wrong with Elaine medically, because as she comes to climax, she dies on top of Beau, thus creating for Beau the moment that supposedly happened to Beau's mother. Beau's mother then reveals that she is not dead. She has a couple of housekeepers take care of Elaine's body and then sort of reveals to Beau, oh, this is the whole deal. This is everything that is going on. Beau at this point kind of really just wants to know why. He's obviously a stand-in for the audience for much of the movie, and in this moment, he just wants to know why. Why lie to me about this? Why lie to my father about this? But most importantly, why fake your own death? And in the ultimate moment of Munchausen syndrome and the ultimate moment of sort of passive-aggressive controlling by this mother figure, she basically tells him it's all his fault, that he was not a loving child, that he did not care for her, that she gave him all the love that she could give, and he never gave that same love back, and because of that, he is a failure. It is also at this point the therapist comes out of a room in the home and reveals that all of their sessions were recorded and being sent to Mona because he is on her payroll. Again, whether it is to not this is real or not is up to interpretation, but it's just sort of supposed to be taking your deepest anxieties. What if your mother faked her death because she wanted to prove that you didn't really love her? What if your therapist recorded all of your sessions so that he could make fun of you? That kind of thing is definitely coming through in this movie. It's at this point that Beau and his mother have a little bit of a back and forth. Beau, throughout the movie, I haven't brought this up because I felt it didn't matter up until this point to bring up, but Beau has been having a recurring dream his entire life where he is in the perspective of himself in the bath, and he watches his mother talk to another version of himself. Again, whether or not this is another version of himself or possibly a twin he had when they were children that he doesn't remember is up to the viewer. I've seen both interpretations in reviews and comments online. My personal opinion is that this is just a version of Beau that he imagines that can stand up to other people, especially his mother. In the nightmare, his mother then locks this alternate version of himself in the attic of her home. She then forces our Beau back into the bathtub, being the infantilized a man that he is. He does what he is asked without any prompting. Now, back to our moment. Beau simply wants to know what has happened to his father, why he was lied to, and what is going on. Mona tells him that the answers to his questions are up in the attic that he has been seeing over and over and over again in his nightmares. This is probably the weirdest part of this movie, and if there's anything that's going to take people who are enjoying this film up to this point and really turn them off, it is this moment. I really liked it, but it's because I'm okay with very strange and out there movie-making decisions. Beau is locked in the attic by his mother. It's a massive attic. The attic itself could be the size of most people's houses. And in one part of the home, he sees what we assume is the image of his father, decrepit and old and chained to the wall. And then he sees also an alternate version of himself, also, again, old and decrepit and chained to the wall, eating food out of what looks to be like a dog bowl or some sort of just rudimentary dish. Beau then is attacked by Jeeves. It's clear that Jeeves is not really there because he jumps through what should be like a third or fourth story window, punches Beau in the face with the butt of a knife, and then attacks what... there's just no other way to say it. There is a 20-foot tall penis in the corner of the attic that has a face and pincers. Jeeves attacks this, and then the pincer kills Jeeves. The penis with its pincers kills Jeeves. It stabs him in the head, and he dies. It's at this point that Beau's mother lets him back down into the house, and they have a confrontation where she almost admits that she hates him, and as she's mid the words, "I hate you," to Joaquin Phoenix, Beau then wraps his hands around her throat. To have come this far and to have had as much happen to him as has had happened to him, Beau is not about to let his mother tell him that she hates him. That's... After everything that he's gone through to get here and to do this for his mother, I don't think Beau is willing to allow this to happen. So he does it. He gets upset with her and he escapes onto a boat. And we'll talk about the ending scene of this movie. I just want to talk about the penis. Not a phrase that I thought I was going to have to say in this review channel, but let's talk about the penis. The 20-foot tall penis in the attic. To kind of wrap this into the general idea of theme in this movie, Beau is Afraid is a movie about a man giving up his manhood to his mother. That is pretty clearly the bit here, and no clearer is it encapsulated than in this moment. His mother has literally locked his manhood in an attic with the version of himself capable of standing up to her, and possibly also his father, again, depending on your interpretation of this movie and where things go. That's, to me, the clearest interpretation of the penis in the attic, is that his manhood has been stolen from him and locked away for his entire life. At this point, Beau decides he's going to run away. His mother has a heart attack and dies. She crashes into a fish tank. Beau runs out of the house, again, always running away. This character, he's an infant. He's a grown infant. He finds a boat by a lake or an ocean. It's hard to tell. Not really sure where this movie takes place. It doesn't really tell you. He takes the boat into a cave. Inside of the cave is a stadium with large screens that display Beau. Beau's boat starts to sputter out and is kind of sitting in place. Again, a very clear metaphor for Beau and his life, his inability to make decisions, to go in a direction, to make a choice. And it's here where Richard Kind makes his physical cameo. He and Mona Wasserman, again played by the fantastic Patti LuPone, are watching Joaquin Phoenix and basically dissecting him to a crowd of people. They go over a few incidents from Beau's childhood where Richard Kind's character is trying to convince the audience that Beau is not a good man, that Beau is not a good child, and he's never treated his mother well, and that his mother's feelings towards Beau are for these reasons, because Beau is the only thing that Mona had in her life after the death of her husband, the supposed death of her husband. That impetus for love was all put on Beau, and Beau was not willing to meet the task and almost was a cruel child at points. Beau does have his own defense team in this sort of litigation, but his defense, in, again, very symbolic moment, is far away and does not have a microphone to speak with, unlike Richard Kind's character. Again, to me, the metaphor is very obvious here. It's very on point. Beau is not somebody capable of standing up for or speaking for himself. Eventually, it gets too much for Beau to handle, this being dissected by Richard Kind's character and sort of the character assassination in front of a large group of anonymous strangers, and Beau's boat capsizes. He goes under, and after a minute, the water goes still, and we start to see the members of the audience in the stadium file out one by one. This should be pretty obvious, what that means. You, as the audience members, are going to start filing out of this movie one by one, and we don't really get a lot of reaction from any of them, which I think is a fair point. As I was watching this movie, I think I, under my breath, said, "What the F?" a few times. But I didn't say F. And I heard a few other people as they were leaving the movie theater kind of like mumble and say like, "Oh, that was really weird." But that was really all that I heard from other people. I've never gotten such a quiet reaction to a film. I don't think people knew how to feel about this movie as they were leaving. I loved it. I don't really know what else to say on it at this point. The visuals are absolutely beautiful. The animated sequence in particular is the standout portion. I think that people will be talking about that bit for a while. From my understanding, it was done by a European YouTube animation crew. The cinematography was absolutely beautiful. It was done by Powell Pogorzelski. I'm sorry if I butchered your name. He has been the director of photography on all of Ari Aster's films. So far, he's also done a few other movies, like Fresh, which was that movie that came out on Hulu relatively recently. He's done a few things, Nobody, which was that the movie with Bob Odenkirk that was supposed to be sort of like a parody of John Wick. But prior to that, he hadn't done too much other than Tragedy Girls, which was a movie I'd heard about, still have yet to see. Heard it was pretty okay. But the cinematography here is absolutely beautiful. I don't really expect any less from Ari Aster and his movies, so I wasn't surprised when the visuals were absolutely gorgeous. Again, all of the performances in this movie are fantastic. Nathan Lane, Amy Ryan as Grace. Young Tony, played by Kylie Rogers, again, fantastic. Richard Kind, Bill Hader, the young Elaine and Beau do a fantastic job. Patti LuPone as Mona are all great. The core strength of this movie is how beautifully it dives into its themes. And as complicated and as confusing as this movie presents itself, I do think the themes of it are pretty simplistic. What happens to a man when he is infantilized to the point where he cannot make choices for himself? It ends up taking his entire life away from him. Not just his manhood, but also all of the chances he had in life, all of the opportunities he had in life. And the worst part about this movie is that his mother clearly feels no regret for any of the things that have happened to him. Thanks again for watching. If you watched the whole thing, thanks so much. I'm a small channel. I don't get many views, so I appreciate anybody who stuck around for this entire review. I do have a background in acting and writing. I spent some time in Los Angeles pursuing both of those before I moved back home to Denver, Colorado to help my mom out financially for a little while, and I've been here since. But writing is a huge part of these movies to me. It's what brings me into the movies, and this movie has some pretty solid writing with some pretty fantastic themes and morals throughout. Very strongly written, very straightforward, at least in my eyes, from a thematic perspective. And I'm going to go ahead and give Beau is Afraid a 10 out of 10. If you liked the video, please leave a like. Subscribe if you're looking for more content. I'm going to try to put out 5 regular reviews, all under 10 minutes a week. My content will all be rant-style videos like this. I may put out more rants in the future. I don't expect them to garner nearly as many views as my other stuff. If you did like my stuff, feel free to share it with your fellow film buffs. And see you, Space Cowboy.